Thank you so much. And let me share my screen. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Chris Leeth, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And I'm here with our cohort of doctoral students, who I'm going to introduce in just a second. And we are going to present about bystander intervention with bullying. And so this is something that I'm really passionate about, anti-bullying and bullying intervention. And so hopefully this gets a lot of people thinking about sort of not only the toxic effects of bullying, but creative ways to intervene with it and to prevent it at a school level. So this is really aimed for school counselors, professional counselors, really any mental health practitioner can help with the prevention of bullying. And what we're seeing is that bystander intervention is a very efficacious way of decreasing the occurrence rate of bullying. And so I want to take a second to introduce my co-presenters, our doctoral students. We have Catherine McVeigh, who's doing her licensed internship, and she's working with kids and making a lot of progress. Ross Spears, who is very interested in neurofeedback and multiculturalism and social advocacy. Michael Lillis, who has his license and he knows everything there is to know about addictions. Tatiana Cruz, who's also licensed and has a tremendous amount of knowledge about working with forensic and clinical populations. Madeline Duffy, who knows a ton about relational counseling and college counseling and working with adults, and she works in our Center for Student Success. And I'm a licensed professional counselor supervisor, and I should go back and say everybody here is working with our Center for Student Success. So they're all working with students who are looking at professional careers and making sure that they're set up for success. So I'm gonna move us along, and I'm gonna let Catherine and Ross talk to us about what is bullying and what it does, and what do we mean by that term bullying, so that there's a nice foundation about what we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Leeth. And so when we were kind of coining this and in talking about bullying, there are some things that kind of need to be achieved in order for bullying to be classified as such. And so one of these topics is that it has to be a repetitive instances that are happening. And so the bully is continually showing these actions or providing these things to other students around them. And along with that, it has to be intentional. The bully has to go into it with the intention of kind of stirring things up and knowing what's going on behind them as well too. And then a big piece here is the power difference. And this can manifest in a number of ways. It can be age, it can be grade level, it can be gender, things like this, but there will be some sort of an imbalance that happens between the bully and the victim or survivor.
Sure. So when we think about those types of bullying, there's three different approaches. You see that traditional physical aspect of bullying. So when we think of maybe some school bullying, some pushing a student into the lockers, that kind of aspect. There's that relational component. So if you would think of like the Mean Girls movie, maybe some microaggressions involved of controlling that friendship dynamic. And then of course, with the increase in technology, we see that rise in cyberbullying, which is an interesting component because it takes away that identification. And a lot of the times it could be anonymous as well.
Yeah, and so some of the outcomes that come from students or children that are affected within bullying. Sometimes these are the common symptoms or again, outcomes that can come from this. So children can experience a lot of anxiety around this phenomena. Again, because it is repetitive and it's intentional by the bully. Sometimes there's a pattern there and sometimes there's not. So these kids are very anxious about what's going to happen the next time they see them, or maybe the next time they don't see them, or when they see them and nothing happens again. So they're in that constant state of worry and when is this going to happen again? Kids can also face a lot of depressive episodes, and in finding that these things are a little bit more uncontrollable for them and they start showing these symptoms of depression. For the older kids that this happens to, substance use is also a problem that can come out of this. I'm sure there are many other studies out there too, but they show that this is kind of like a gateway to it as well, of being a victim or survivor of bullying. Anger comes from this, and this manifests in a bunch of different ways between children and in their family. They also show that there's anger in the different ways that kids present to their current friend group, their families, and even with what they look like in the classroom as well. On top of that, there's a lot of shame that comes with bullying. A victim or survivor may feel a lot of shame and guilt that comes with it, that they've done something to deserve this, or that this is happening to them because they need it. And unfortunately, a big cause or a big outcome that can come of bullying is also suicide. And I'm sure that these have gotten a lot more publicized in news lately. And of course, many states are doing a lot of networking and lawmaking to help prevent this final outcome. But these outcomes have major effects on these kids that may not seem to be at that forefront of their mind, and especially at the bully's mind at the age levels that they may be at. But I think I read one the other day where there was a kid as young as 4th grade committing suicide because of this. So it is getting younger and younger with the students. This isn't just a high school problem anymore, but now elementary kids are facing this outcome as well.
Yeah, so we'll go a little into it further on in the presentation, but these are just the different bullying components. So we see the bully, the victim, the bullied victim, and then the bystander as well.
Yeah, so for those of you watching in the chat, feel free to come on this. And so I will read these and I will give you guys some time to kind of participate here. So just write if this is a myth or a fact. So the first one asks, bullies lack confidence. Is this a myth or is this a fact? Okay, so this one, it comes out to be a myth. We are correct for those of you in the chat. Bullies, this is a myth. That lack of confidence, it actually is proven differently, that they actually assert a lot of confidence in this, not only when they're bullying, but outside of those bullying tactics that come along with it too. The next one is bullies know what they are doing. Okay, it looks like there's some mixed comments in here, but for the most part, research is showing that bullies do know what they are doing. They may not be able to perceive the long-term outcomes of this, but they know enough of it to know that it is intentional and it does cause somewhat of an outcome to other students when they are in fact bullying. This last one is aggression is a method of gaining popularity. Myth or fact? Yeah, so what I can see here is that most people were saying it was a fact, and yes, bullies kind of assert, for lack of a better word, dominance over this by showing aggression to others, and in doing so, it does gain somewhat of a popularity response from the other students watching, and I'm sure that my co-presenters will go into this a little bit more, but yes, this is a way that bullies can kind of rise to that popularity standard set in some schools.
So what is the goal for a student that's participating in these bullying acts? And it's that idea, either conscious or unconscious, is that idea of the validation. Are they receiving that level of positive reinforcement that would promote them to act out again. And so that's what we're hoping to convey with this presentation.
Yeah, and so here, so on the opposite end of the bully, we do have the survivor. And there's typically, like I was saying before, there's some difference as to why bullies target these students. And so whether it be age, ability, appearance, ethnicity, race, even weight, there is some sort of, like I was saying earlier, that power imbalance between the two of them. Yeah, and then we also just kind of wanted to bring attention to this, that we do use the term survivor and victim interchangeably in this presentation, just because research has shown either way. There's still a lot of research going off of the victim, but there's still now some coming from like the counseling perspective that are more encouraging of survivor. And so we just want to take this point to highlight that these can be interchanged throughout our presentation, just according to the research that we were looking at that time. Did anybody else in my co-presenters have anything else to add to that?
I think you got it. Yeah, so when we think about that bully victim aspect, it's almost as a cycle. So we see a student getting bullied, and then in return, that prompts this victim to bully somewhere else. So we see that projection onto another student or another person.
Yeah, and Ross, this is kind of manifested in a way where the bully victim then has to choose that choice, where are they going to continue to be a victim in these situations, or they see that the only way to kind of get out of that is to become a bully instead. And so if they become a bully, they feel like it's less likely for the bullying to still be done to them. So instead, like you were saying, they kind of break into that cycle of becoming another bully out of this. This one, we will go into a lot more detail, but basically bystanders are anyone that is witness to the bullying episode, whether they participate or not. We just classify this as a witness, but there are levels and different types of bystanders that we will talk about.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the interesting components in some of those statistics behind bystanders, and that in most situations of bullying, we see that there's 80% of those situations involve bystanders, often more. And from those, only 20% provided some kind of intervention. So that means out of, I think it's on another slide, that 1 or 2, only 50% will be effective. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so let's just say that there are 10 students who observe a bullying episode going on of them. Out of the 10 students that are observers, only 2 of them will do something. And then to even cut down that statistic a little bit more, only 1 of the 2 that stand up and do something will actually have an effect on the episode and how it is happening in present time.
And I'm going to chime in here just real quick. Ross and Catherine hit the nail on the head. Bullying most commonly occurs in the context of other people around to watch. So if I'm a bully, I want that crowd because that's feeding whatever it feeds, my confidence, my validation. And so when we talk about bystander intervention, we want students to intervene somehow. That doesn't mean, getting between the two. It can be getting an adult. It can be following up with the survivor later on. What Ross and Catherine are highlighting is that, one, there's almost always at least a handful of other students who see this happening, but very few of them will engage or intervene. And so that's something for us to, as clinicians and as counselors and researchers, that's something for us to note.
I can take mention of this. Why are there so many bystanders? And this has to do with a lot with bullying is most effective in front of a crowd, like Dr. Leeth was just mentioning, that the validation a bully receives from engaging in this behavior in front of a group of people is what continues to validate the bully as the situation goes on. So we'll get into what bystanders can do about that in the next couple of slides here. Okay, so different types of bystanders. I mentioned bullying is most effective in front of a crowd, and 80% of situations where bullying occurs happens in front of at least one individual. If we think of a typical hallway situation, you can kind of see it displayed out here, how the different roles of bystanders would happen in the hallway. An important thing to remember in a bullying situation in these communal settings is that everyone is involved. Everyone plays a role. Anyone who is around a situation has a role that they're contributing to the situation. So the 4 types of bystanders, we have assistants, reinforcers, outsiders, and defenders. We don't see any defenders here in this photo here. But one reason bullying is so prevalent is because it works. And bullying in a community situation where there are lots of individuals observing it just continues to reinforce it. And we'll talk about that in future slides as well, how we can steer interventions towards those bystanders, towards those individuals that witness the situation, and we can curb behavior that way. So the first type of bystander would be assistants or co-bullies. These are individuals who obviously contribute to the bullying or engage in the bullying in some way. Individuals that join in on the bullying. This would be your typical movie scene situation of whether it's the popular girls or the sports team, but you have a group of bullies, perhaps led by one individual, that follows through in a lot of movie tropes there, where you might see individuals teaming up together to participate in bullying behavior. This can be attributed somewhat to groupthink, individuals following along with the behavior of the individual bully for fear of being bullied themselves, or perhaps to gain popularity. There's a lot of different research on reasons why they might follow through and be assistants to the bully in those sort of situations. All right, next slide. Oh, I think we have a question as well. How are assistants considered a type of bystander? Aren't they bullies as well? Yeah, so that's a very good question. Thank you. So one thing about assistants would be that they themselves wouldn't have initiated the behavior, but contribute to the behavior. And that's kind of the idea of that group think, is there is an individual who the main bully initiates the bullying, and these individuals go along with it because of pressure from the bully, peer pressure, that sort of thing, but are in a way victims of that bully, and there's a hierarchy to the bullying. So yes, while they would be considered bullies themselves, co-bullies, they aren't a bully that would have initiated the situation. Secondly, we have reinforcers. This is kind of that next level down, individuals cheering on the bully from the sidelines. It provides a sense of support to the bully. So these would be, if you think of all of the viral videos of bullying that have come onto the internet, you can see in these videos, all of the students have their cell phones out and are filming an incident. All those individuals would be considered reinforcers. The bully gains a sense of empowerment from the attention that they are getting in that moment of people holding out their phones and seeing what's going on. This cheers the bully on to continue and can, in many instances, escalate the bullying further. To see that a crowd is gathered can just continue that domino effect of pushing the bullying further. The next type of individuals would be outsiders. These individuals give their silent approval to the bullying. An outsider, when questioned about a bullying situation, might identify themselves as an innocent bystander. I didn't do anything. This was happening. I saw it, but I wasn't involved. The important thing when we talk about education on bullying to give to these types of bystanders is that even though you didn't do anything, you were involved. That not saying anything inadvertently validates the bully by not saying you need to stop this. It encourages the bully to keep going by just walking past it and not engaging. This continues to reinforce that behavior. Now, why might someone not engage in this situation? There's a number of reasons, and research has shown it could be out of fear of being bullied themselves. And bystander effect, which I'm sure Tatiana will talk about in future slides as to why individuals might not get involved. But essentially, an outsider is an individual who walks away without taking sides. And the last type of bystander that we have are defenders. Defenders are individuals that come in and help the bully victim. This can be in the moment when the bullying is going on to try and intervene, or this can be afterwards in consoling and helping in that way. A defender might also be someone who sees the bullying and feels that they aren't strong enough to act on their own. And so they go off and leave the situation to go and get help, or whether it's calling someone or running to find a teacher in the vicinity. The defender would be someone who says, okay, this is a situation that I'm not comfortable with, they are clearly not comfortable with, and I need to take action in some way. What that action might be, whether it's getting involved in trying to de-escalate the situation themselves, or comforting the person afterwards, or walking away and finding help. There's a number of situations in which someone might work to defend the bully victim. So those are the 4 types of bystanders. I think now we'll go on to talk about bystander intervention. Barriers to helping, I'm sorry. Well, I think Tatiana, you'll take it from here, yes?
Yes, thank you, Michael. So that was a really great set into what I'm going to talk about and why all of the bystanders we're seeing are not in that defender role. What is keeping them from helping? What's keeping them from getting involved or seeking resources? And the first one, the big one, right, is that bystander effect. So the bystander effect occurs when the presence of others discourages an individual from intervening in an emergency situation like bullying. The greater amount of people, the greater amount of bystanders makes it less likely for anyone to provide help to a person in distress. And people are less likely to take action in a crisis when there are more people, and more likely when there are few to no witnesses. And that's contributed to 2 main factors. That first one is the diffusion of responsibility. So it's the idea that when there are more onlookers, more people there, there's less personal responsibility to get involved. Like the picture here, right? That's the idea that surely someone else is going to step up. Surely someone else is better equipped or knows more or is more appropriate to help. Maybe someone's already helping now. Maybe someone already went for help, right? I don't have to do it. It's not really up to me to do it. There's so many people here. And when everyone has that mindset, no one's doing it because everyone's assuming someone else will or can help better than they're going to. The other big one is social influence. And that's the idea that individuals, and that's not just adolescents and students, but all of us in our interactions, we tend to monitor the behavior of the people around us when we're determining how to act. We take the cues from what everyone else is doing, and that's kind of what we identify as being normal. So everyone else is cheering or ignoring. Michael talked about the situation of that kind of common hallway scene of bullying. This seems normal. Everyone's fine with this. Everyone's okay. I'm okay with it too. Or I'm not going to do anything either. I'm just going to walk by, right? So I'm doing what everyone else is doing. In an effort to combat this a little bit, I know that we've discussed that some policies and some schools are trying to have it so that bullies and victims have to identify bystanders of an altercation afterwards and identify those that did witness the situation, to put the onus of responsibility on the school community to speak up and act. And we'll talk more about those interventions later, but that is one way that the bystander effect can be addressed. All right, the next big reason that people don't come forward or don't seek help, and Michael mentioned this as well, is fear, the fear of retaliation. So bystanders fear that they'll be retaliated against or victimized by the perpetrator. That's really common, especially in that school-based bullying situations, as I'm sure you can imagine. An adolescent bystander might wonder, what's preventing this person from acting out towards me? If I get involved, the idea of stepping in or reporting it, even comforting the the victim after, or the survivor afterwards, might be what if they come after me for doing this, right? What if my involvement is actually dangerous? So that fear of retaliation really, really speaks to that power differential that Catherine and Ross spoke about originally. That is fundamental to bullying, right? They have power. I'm afraid of that power. All right, this next one is talking about the chances that if I'm not known, it is easier to not get involved. And what I mean by that is, if a bystander feels like they don't know the victim or the victim doesn't know them, there's a less likelihood that they'll want to act out. People want to stand up for their friends and they want to stand up for their community members, whether it's driven by an increased empathy for the people we know, or it's driven by guilt that those friends and those peers will know that we witnessed it and did nothing. The research kind of talks about both. But whatever one it is, it changes the way that people are going to act if they know the victim. And this is seen in cyberbullying a lot. The research shows that people are less likely to actively defend victims of cyberbullying if, one, there's a higher number of people witnessing it, so that bystander effect, but then that's then exasperated by if I know the person or not. And if it's just an acquaintance, bystanders will perceive that they are less likely to do something. Again, this is made even worse if the website is not, the platform, social media, whatever that looks like, isn't tracking or recording that they are the one viewing or witnessing this. So if there's no proof that they were there or this is what they're seeing, it's easier to just disappear and pretend like they weren't there. Nothing's really holding them accountable. And this last one is going to come down to two big things. Does the bystander know what to do, and is what they do going to make a difference? So do I know what to do? This is the experience a bystander has when they feel completely unprepared, or maybe they don't know the appropriate steps or protocol. This could be the result of unclear or miscommunicated bullying intervention, and unprepared bystanders might not know the resources to utilize or how to locate a safe adult or the appropriate person to report to. So that feeling of, I don't know what to do, I'm not the right person for this, is often going to lead to that inaction. Versus, I know that Miss so-and-so in room 201, right, she's going to keep it anonymous and I can trust her and I can reach out to her, and she's going to help me figure out the next steps, right? But if I don't know that that person's there, that resource is there, I'm likely not going to do anything. And then this last piece is, will what I do make a difference? And that really has to do with the climate of bullying and bullying intervention in the school. If it's inconsistent, if I don't trust that there's going to be consequences for the bully, what's the point of me doing anything? This also goes back to that idea of retaliation. If I'm afraid of a bully and I know that speaking out could potentially put me in harm's way, and at the same time, I don't trust that the school or administration are going to commit to any kind of consequences, now that negative reality is a lot higher than the positive, right? What does seeking help do? It just puts me in harm's way and no one's actually going to get in trouble or no one's going to be held accountable. Dr. Leeth, is there anything you'd add to that?
No, excellent job, Tatiana. Yeah, so lots of things kind of get in the way of students deciding to help students who are being bullied. However, we see a lot of evidence that it is effective, that bystander intervention not only reduces bullying, but also reduces the negative effects. And so what I'm going to talk about briefly is about the bystander intervention model. Now, this is a model that describes why, or I guess I should say, it describes the process a bystander goes through when thinking about, should I intervene? Should I get an adult? Should I say something? And it's a 5-part model, and I'll not spend a tremendous amount of time on it, but this just kind of shows the cognitive process that one goes through. And this is the widely accepted model that students go through when they observe, I'll say, a questionable situation. The first phase in intervention is noticing, right? So think of the TSA saying when you're at the airport, if you see something, say something, right? And so the first step is students being aware of what's going on. And we can increase this, right, this noticing ability by fostering a school climate of watching out for peers, for being aware of who your peers are, who your friends are. And Madeline's going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But it starts with seeing and just being aware of what's going on around you, what's going on in your school. Determining if what I'm seeing is bullying, right? And so when I bring up bullying in my courses, I will usually get someone who says, but what if it's just a group of friends just kind of roasting each other or poking fun? That's not what we're talking about. When it's consensual, it by definition is not bullying. Bullying is not a consensual act. And if it's two people, going back to Catherine and Ross, where there's no imbalance of power, say it's maybe two athletes vying to be, I'm not an athletics guy, but they want to be the big player on the team, and they're kind of picking at each other, but they're equals. This is just two people fighting, right? This is just two people competing, flaring their feathers, right? But helping students, parents, teachers, staff understand what bullying is, that you're going to see an imbalance of power. One person's going to have a tremendous amount of power, and one person is going to experience a lot of harm, a lot of oppression. It's not a one-off thing, though a one-time thing can be hurtful. Bullying by definition is repetitive. So we want students to be able to identify and determine, is this bullying? And then also just acknowledging, like, if it looks questionable, maybe talk to somebody or tell somebody. Making the decision to intervene. So this is the big part. So this is, what do I do? Should I do it? Should I say something? And that's where we really want students to have an attitude of, I will take action. I won't just stand by. And that Mike did an excellent job of explaining the silent observer, the outsider, just watching, even though you're not contributing to it. If you're watching it, you're inadvertently giving that bully that attention, right? And so they might want the crowd. So if you're just standing there watching quietly, you're still contributing. If you walk away and you don't watch, that doesn't change the fact that you saw someone getting harmed, getting bullied. And what I'll talk about a little bit later is that one of the most traumatic aspects of bullying is when a victim knows that there was a bystander who witnessed it and did nothing. So we want to help students get to a place of intervening, deciding to, I'm going to do something. And again, just to reiterate, we're not suggesting like, hey, if there's two people, you jump in the middle of it and you mix it up with them. We don't want, vigilante justice. It can be something like, go tell the student resource person, go tell the teacher, talk to the victim afterwards.
If I could jump in for a quick sec, Dr. Leeth, one thing about what you were just saying, there are different bystander intervention models based on the type of bystander. I will say that majority of models are based on these outsiders, the innocent bystanders, and those individuals saying, okay, you see something, say something, what's going on here? Maybe we get involved and become defenders. There are different models geared towards those that are assistants and those that are reinforcers, those that are taking out their phones and actually filming it, and finding ways to change that cognitive perception of the situation from, I'm filming this because it's funny and I like looking at it, to hold on, this is a problematic situation. The reason you took out your phone to film this maybe now, instead of filming it, might be a reason why to go and talk to somebody else. Or even the assistant role, getting someone to say, okay, hold on, why do I feel like I need to be involved in this bullying experience? Why am I becoming a co-bully in this situation? And how can I, instead of enabling the situation, work to de-escalate it? So there are different intervention models based on the type of bystander, and research has more so been in the outsider one, and suggestions for bystander intervention in that one. But I did want to just mention there's a few different categories based on interventions.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important aspect to recognize. choosing a method. So they're at the stage where I've decided to intervene. Now, what do I do? Now we want students to take a prosocial and proactive approach, right? Proactive is like you're deciding to, I'm going to intervene. I'm not going to sit by and watch this happen. Prosocial means we want to do something that's healthy and acceptable, right? Not something that's, antisocial, where I saw the bully picking on this kid, so now like I'm gonna go fight him, right? We don't want that. Or I'm gonna make a blog where I make fun of the bully. We don't want something like that. That just kind of makes that dynamic of a bully victim. We want it to be prosocial and proactive. And so what I'll talk about at the end of the presentation are the STACK techniques. And STACK is a bystander intervention education plan out of Boise State that is getting a lot of traction, a lot of attention. It's showing a lot of really wonderful results that are really easy to implement in different settings, whether they're schools or communities and things like that. And we'll talk about those concrete steps that we can give students in a little bit. And then finally, implementing, right? So we've done all the thinking, and now it's time to do the doing, right? It's time to get involved, to act. And so to do this, back to Tatiana's point, we got to increase that self-efficacy, have students realize I can do this, and also that I know that what I do will make a difference, right? As she pointed out, if a student runs and says, I told the teacher and the teacher didn't do anything, then the next time, why would they bother, right? So really, bullying and bystander intervention, it really revolves around the entire school. Studies are showing that taking this head-on approach to reduce bullying by addressing, hey, don't bully, you're addressing the maybe aggressive students and saying this is not healthy, isn't effective. So we're kind of in that situation that DARE was in. Remember DARE to stay off drugs? That we pumped for decades, I shouldn't say decades, almost a decade, and then found out it wasn't effective at all. We're finding out that doing psychoeducation where we talk only about, hey, don't be a bully, bullying is really dangerous and really harmful, is not sufficient. However, we're seeing the reverse when we talk about bystander education and intervention, which affects the school climate, right? So this is becoming it's showing to be a more efficient way of decreasing bullying and stopping the effects and kind of undoing the harm that's caused. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Madeline, and she's going to talk to us about what are some predictors of intervention, what leads to making that decision to, I'm going to intervene somehow, whether it's direct intervention, following up with the student afterwards, or telling a grown-up.
Thank you, Dr. Leeth. All right, so one of the first predictors of intervention is prosocial behavior. So that's really normalizing helping, and that would be normalizing it within the school or the community where the potential victims and bullies are. So really make it part of the culture where it is known and accepted and encouraged to speak out and intervene. And the next is identification. So it's importantly to be able to correctly assess a situation as bullying. And Dr. Leeth mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just knowing the difference between, what is bullying and what is, other forms of, whether it's playfulness or something else, being able to distinguish the two. And that way you can intervene when bullying is taking place. And it's also really important to know school peers. People are more likely to intervene, as we've said, when they know the people who they are with, when they have a sense of community and a relationship with them. And again, understanding the effects of bullying. So research has shown that if you just say don't bully, that's not going to be as effective as letting students know that there really are specific consequences that happen from bullying, and walking them through that. They're much more likely to intervene. And then self-efficacy of intervening. So you're more likely to do something if you feel like you know how to do it. Sometimes we tend to avoid things because we feel unconfident, we don't know what's going on, we're unsure of ourselves. So really educating students and then building up their own self-confidence and self-efficacy with being able to follow through. And of course, relationships are so important. So increasing the connection between students, building that sense of community and friendship that Tatiana talked about earlier. When you don't have that, bullying is more likely to happen. And when you do have that, people are more likely to intervene. So that's something that's really important. And I think Dr. Leeth is going to talk a little bit about intervention education.
All right, thanks, Madeline. So you might be sitting there saying, okay, they've gone on about bullying and it's bad and how other students or bystanders should intervene, but what do I do? How do I get these students to do that? And so this is sort of the hands-on implication part of the presentation, what you can do with your students, or if you're working with a community, you're doing psychoeducation, you're a school counselor, or you're brought in, you're consulting. These are the steps that you can take to increase bystander intervention. It starts, again, I think we've driven this point home. It does start with education, right? Defining what bullying is and what it isn't. Scale it appropriately with age and development, right? We would expect the way teenagers to understand bullying to be more sophisticated, and you would be able to use more intricate or complex language than if you were working with kindergarten through 4th grade, right? But defining what it is, because we want students to A, be able to identify if they're being bullied, and B, we want them to be able to identify if their friends or their peers are. Explaining the role of bystanders, right? And so this is where I really think, and I was sharing with my co-presenters, I think of when I was in K through 12 and we'd have these different pep rallies and school gatherings, right? Go Bulldogs. And it would focus on school climate, right? Have a sense of school pride. And so understanding it's not sufficient for you to just not bully. We want you to also help reduce bullying by getting help for that survivor, bringing it to our attention, and really fostering this school climate of we're all watching out for one another, and this harmful behavior doesn't have a place, right? We can't just, it's not sufficient to just kind of keep our eyes forward and have tunnel vision. And there's a lot of individual stuff I do acknowledge that comes with it about, well, one person might not want to intervene for any number of reasons. We're talking very broadly with that whole student population, addressing it and saying, hey, you can also help reduce this. And what we're seeing is that schools that implement this kind of training have a significant reduction in their bullying incidences. Policy and enforcement. So this is a big one. And I just want you to think about your own experiences in kindergarten through 12th grade, maybe even in college, grad school, and in the workplace, because certainly bullying doesn't end at the end of high school. It can continue, it takes different forms. But think about those teachers or coaches or administrators that when they hear about it, they take decisive action. And on the flip side, we have some who will go to a place of, well, boys will be boys, or that's how girls are, right? Not to be gender stereotypical, but to say that's what teenagers do, that's just high school, just kind of brushing it off, right? We need there to be some sort of enforcement, and the discussion about what happens with the bully and restorative justice or punishment, that's a different conversation, whole different can of worms. What we're talking about here today, though, is what to do for that survivor of bullying, right? And first of all, that bullying has to stop, and then helping that survivor work through whatever deleterious effects it had. But we needed to be consistent. So if coach so-and-so is always on the ball and he says, nope, I'm not going to tolerate this. If one of my athletes is doing something like that, we're going to address it and I'm going to make sure it stops. And then if Mr. So-and-so, the English teacher, just doesn't really care, doesn't acknowledge, doesn't follow up, that's really going to interfere with bystander intervention. Because again, it leads to a dynamic of what's the point? Nothing ever changes. And again, to reiterate the point, one of the most traumatizing effects of bullying is when a victim says, I need help, or I know someone is aware that this is happening and they don't do anything to help me. So I mentioned earlier STACK, which is by a group out of Boise State, and they have a really great program. They're getting a lot of literature. It's very time efficient. It doesn't take much time to implement this at a school. And so I'm just doing a brief overview of these are some of the things that bystanders can do. One is steal the show. So trying to diffuse the situation, like maybe via humor or calling attention away from that situation. Turn it over, which is the one that personally I advocate for the most, which is tell an adult, right? Report it. Get someone to come help intervene. Accompany others, right? So follow up with that victim. And I have a slide coming up in a second about what to say to those victims to be impactful and to help mitigate the damage done. And coach compassion, right? So this is where a student talks with a bully and is saying, hey, that really wasn't cool. Are all of these appropriate in every situation? No. That's where I say part of the education is for that student, those bystanders, to determine what can I do? Because certainly we would not want them to be in harm's way. We wouldn't want them to do something that they're uncomfortable with. And that's why the safest one, in my opinion, is always the turn it over and then following up with a student and speaking with them. But maybe it's someone who wants to be known as a person of social justice. They want their reputation of helping people. They want a reputation of a defender, and they might have that confidence and that ability to, in that moment, end it. But if they don't, that's okay. There's still plenty of things that they can do. Again, the point is not to force students into an uncomfortable situation, but to let them know there are many different options and many different ways to help their peers. Speaking of the messages, so this is afterwards, maybe a student is very shy, very bashful, has some of the fear that Tatiana talked about. They can go to the victim afterwards and talk to them about things. And what our research shows is that there are a couple different messages to send victims of bullying. One is an emotional message, right? That validating, like, you're not ugly, you're not weird, you're not strange, right? You're smart, you're funny, I like being your friend, I love that you're in the class, you make great points, whatever it is. And what we see is that this increases the victim's ability to cope with what happened. Attribution messages, so this would sound like this was not your fault. So that guy had no right to do that to you. She was completely in the wrong. She should have never done that. It's not your fault. This reduces self-blame and shame, right? And remember, shame is an incredibly toxic thing, right? So reducing that is paramount. And then finally, change. And I found this the most interesting, so I'm curious to hear people's reaction. Change messages, which is essentially saying, he's not always going to be that way. She's not always going to be that way. A bully can change. And especially when coming from another survivor of bullying, it has this incredible effect on the victim that decreases rumination, decreases shame, and it reduces revenge thoughts. So it kind of reduces that, the bully victim cycle. And it also reduces maybe thoughts of, I'll show them, or they'll miss me when I'm gone, things like that. It really kind of tapers that down quite a bit. And so I do want counselors to think about where these comments are coming from, right? They can't just be boilerplate statements. Those of you that have worked with kids can attest to this. They are incredibly adept at detecting authenticity. And so if they think that this is a boilerplate message or you're just saying it to me, they'll know it. These types of comments are incredibly impactful when they come from another survivor of bullying, or when they come from somebody completely anonymous or a complete stranger. And I think that's one of those things where it's like, when I put on a new dress shirt and I ask my wife, does this look nice? And she says yes. And I go to a place of, well, you have to say that, right? When it's somebody who says, hey, what a nice shirt, and it's just like a stranger at the grocery store, I'm like, it must be a nice shirt then, right? Because they didn't have to say it, right? And so the same dynamic happens here, that when students receive anonymous messages or just from someone they don't know about, hey, you are worthwhile, you matter. That guy was such a jerk, he was wrong, he shouldn't have ever done that. That alleviates a lot of the angst that's caused by the bullying. And I thought that was really incredible, because these are things that you can take and talk to students about, right? You can lead a really quick socio-emotional learning section. You can do a quick group, you can do a quick activity. You can pull people aside at lunch and just say, hey, do you know how to tell a peer how that they matter? Do you know how to, as they get older, you can start talking about the attribution messages and the change. And if you want to elicit other people to participate, you can say, hey, if you want to get involved, here's a way, I want you to meet so-and-so. They're kind of struggling with some of the same things. And that brings me to implications, broad strokes. Lots of good ideas for group counseling for survivors of bullying, right? To have them work together. And same with, I would say, bullies, if it's appropriate to have them understand the effects, although I question that I don't think that would be as efficacious as working directly with survivors of bullying. Pair counseling, where we might here's someone who came to your office or goes to the counselor's office and says, these kids are making fun of me because I'm adopted. And you, the counselor, saying, I really want you to meet so-and-so. They had something similar. And that's where they're able to kind of work together and share these experiences and these different messages. And finally, peer education, which is something that I'm absolutely in love with. This was my career prior to being a counselor and a counselor educator, is helping students take charge by maybe making a group where they are then talking to other students about what is bullying, how to intervene, how to work past some of the hurt that's caused. So having peers help peers, which historically has been very effective, and we're seeing now is equally effective with bullying prevention and intervention. So just to recap quickly, we've got, it looks like a couple minutes, and we can do any questions or concerns. Bystander intervention, getting a lot of attention and is showing to be very effective, very long-term effects, stable results, which is what we want. Lack of support and help is the most traumatic aspect. So it's not just the bullying that hurts, it's also that nobody helped me. Bystander intervention, I really do think can easily be incorporated into schools. I know the big question is always about money and time, but I think that this is one of my favorite sayings is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? And so making the time to address some of these things will pay off in dividends later on as that climate changes. There's a variety of strategies and messages peers can use. And this is something that students, teachers, and administrators must all be involved with. We got to be consistent. We've got to set up a dynamic where if a student says, hey, I saw something that wasn't right, or my friend is hurting, that there is support, that they're not going to be brushed off, right? We want to break that cycle of what's the point, right? Because without that enforcement and that consistency and support from other staff members, then why would our students bother helping? So hopefully everybody sees that bystander intervention is this really viable method, and that it's something that can really reduce bullying and help those who have experienced it. And I think that's the end of our presentation here. So let me stop my sharing and just kind of see if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns we can help with. All right, and it looks like Kelly might have a poll question for us. All right, Kelly, do you want to go ahead and do your question? Mm. And Kelly, this is something that you're asking the attendees. No worries. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. It looks like Kelly has a question for everybody here on a poll. For those of you that would like more information, please feel free to email me, and I'm typing my email into the chat here. If you're a student who's looking for research experience and things like that, this is an area that needs a lot of research. There's lots of opportunities to do it, and it's one of the things that's really grounded in our counseling philosophy of being strength-based, positive, and preventative, right? So we're not looking to pathologize bullies or survivors of bullying, but rather we're looking at ways to empower bystanders to intervene. And looks like my email didn't go to everybody here. Sorry, you'd think by now I'd have Zoom completely figured out, but alas. All right. Well, thank you so much for attending. And if you have any questions or want more information, feel free to reach out. I hope everybody has a great rest of the time at the conference. And thank you to my cohort.